What's good about being able to watch this on screen, maybe your phone, maybe your tablet, is you can go outdoor a little bit, which is so much nicer. Unfortunately, I'm not able to film this outdoor, but maybe one day we'll do that too. Anyhow, from the three pilgrims we talked about, each with their very important historical significance, what they represent in the grand narrative of the Jewish people, in the story of the Exodus, and in the agricultural meaning, the most outdoor holiday, without doubt, is the holiday that falls in the fall, around October usually, the holiday of Sukkot. Let's read from the book of Leviticus, of the third pilgrim festival. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, on the 15th day of the 7th month, there shall be a feast of booths. How you translate the word Sukkot exactly? A feast of Sukkot, that is the Hebrew, to the Lord. 7 days. The first day shall be a sacred occasion. So wait a minute, what's the date? 15th day of the 7th month, which is the month of Tishrei. You remember, we count from Nisan. So if I'll give the names of the months in the Jewish calendar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul, Tishrei. 7th month from April, from spring. So that brings us to the area of October. It's the same month as Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, the month of the high holidays. It's full of holidays. And even one fast day called Yom Kippur and one fast day called Tzom Gedalia that we'll learn about later on. Anyways, the month of Tishrei, the most important month, and here in the full moon again, exactly, it's symmetrical to Passover. Passover was a full moon in spring, and now this is a full moon in fall, 6 months later. The 15th day, everybody comes out of their homes, of the nice homes that they built as regular homes, and go to a temporary booth, to a sukkah, where you cannot have a real roof over your head. It has to be just branches of trees that are cut off and not manufactured in any way that can be a permanent roof. You shall live in booths 7 days. All citizens in Israel shall live in booths, in order that future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I, the Lord your God. So again, in the holiday of Passover, we remembered the Exodus. In the holiday of Shavuot, we remembered Mount Sinai, receiving the Torah. And in the holiday of Sukkot, remembering the migration of the people of Israel in the desert as they sat in temporary homes in Sukkot. And Sukkot also has quite a bit of an agricultural meaning in the land of Israel. It's also called Chag HaAsif. Asif means gathering, bringing in. Mark on your 15th day, this is all the same chapter in the Bible, Leviticus 23. On the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the yield of your land, you shall observe the festival of the Lord 7 days. Okay, what does that mean? Remember, we harvested the wheat when? Very good. Begins with Sha, ends with Vuot. Very good. Shavuot. We harvested the wheat around May, June, but then we leave it in the field to dry out. But you have to bring it into the barn before it rains again. Because if it rains again over this wheat, it's lost. It can rot. And if you want to put some of these seeds back in the ground so you can harvest the next year too, the time is before it rains. Then you need to plow. Then you need to plant the seeds for the next year. So this is the time where every farmer needs to decide how much of the grain will he bring home to feed his family this year, and how much will he invest replant for the future years so he can harvest also the next year. That is the meaning of Sukkot. Kind of bringing in all the harvest, everything that you worked for all year, and preparing yourself to the next year to come. Also in the book of Exodus, the Feast of Ingathering at the end of the year. This is considered the end of the agricultural year and a beginning of a new one. Continuing in our chapter in the book of Leviticus, speaking of agriculture, a very interesting custom. Coming back to the same verses, and now what you see here in bold. On the first day, you shall take the product of hadar trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, and willows. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. So the 4 species, you need to altogether remember 10 species in the land of Israel, 10 plants that are in Jewish tradition. The 4 species of Sukkot and the 7 species that the land of Israel was blessed in. You can read about them in Deuteronomy 8:8, and of course the riddle is how come 7 plus 4 is 10, but that you can solve yourselves. The 4 species from Leviticus 23 are understood as the lulav, which is a frond from the date palm tree, the hadas, the myrtle tree, the arava from the willow, and the citron, the etrog, that are taken together and in this service every morning, a blessing over these 4 species and shaking to all the directions, up, down, north, south, east, west. In the morning, every day of Sukkot, there's a prayer called Hoshana. Hoshana means save us. And in that prayer, we also take these 4 species, ve'etrog, ve'lulav, ve'hadas, ve'arava, and surround in the synagogue the bima where we read the Torah from with the 4 species. Of course, for a tourist coming to Israel and not knowing much about Judaism, seeing people walking around with these plants in their hands, in the bus, everywhere you go, or seeing these circles being made, you know what? Why describe it? Let's watch a little movie and we'll come back to it. So you just saw Hosha'ana Rabbah. Every day we have a prayer called Hosha'ana, and the last day of Sukkot, the 7th day, is called Hosha'ana Rabbah, when we say all the 7 different prayers, starting with the same words Hosha'ana, together and surround the synagogue 7 times with these plants. And you see, if a tourist sees this, you have to explain. You have no choice, even if all you wanted to talk about is something else. So we'll offer a very simple explanation. On Sukkot, we all wait for water, for rain. As we decide to spare our family from some of the food we could give it, We do not take all the wheat home. We plant it and pray for rain in the coming year, which is not something you can take for granted in this region. And believe that God will give rain. Everything we worked so hard for will return the investment. That the seeds we plant will grow. And that is possible only with rain. All these 4 plants are plants that need a lot of water. Even the sound you will hear when you shake them is the sound of rain. And maybe the statement, shaking these plants to all of the directions, is a statement, God that is everywhere, up, down, all around, God will bring rain in the year to come, and it will be a blessed year, and we will be able to continue and feed our families. That is a very simple and connected explanation also to the nature of where we live in. Another explanation that is quite well known uses the 4 different plants as a metaphor for 4 different kinds of people. Those who are very big in doing, those who are very learned, those who are bums and neither do and neither learn, and those who both learn a lot and do a lot of good deeds in this world. And the idea of bringing them all together, as the holiday brings everybody together to celebrate, and believing that if we all are united, we can influence each other for the better, and also come out of the holiday united and improved in our actions, in our deeds, and again bring a blessed year also in the next year, which is, by the way, also a good suggestion in the tour guide course. If everybody can kind of compensate for the weaknesses of his friend, and everybody brings their own strengths, so everybody comes out much stronger at the end of the story. So those were a few words about the 4 species of Sukkot, Lulav, Hadas, Arava, and Etrog. The happiest holiday out of the 3 pilgrim festivals, no doubt, is the holiday of Sukkot. Just, if you think about it, or if you look in the Bible, the word happiness does not come together with Passover, which is surprising, but it's not there. It appears once in the context of Shavuot, and 21 times in the context of Sukkot. That was the largest celebration that Jerusalem knew. And the celebration was called Simchat Bet HaShoeva. Sha'av, the root Shin Aleph Vet in Hebrew, means to bring up water. And what would happen on Sukkot is the priest would go down to the Gihon spring near the city of David, bring up water from the spring to the altar in the temple on Mount Moriah. And there was a whole ceremony of splashing, sprinkling the water on the horns of the altar and praying for rain for the whole nation of Israel in the year to come. And that was an amazing celebration. And the Mishnah tells us whoever never witnessed the Simchat Bet HaShoeva, the celebration, has never in his life seen true joy. And there are descriptions of all the music and dancing and torches that Jerusalem knew. And this is also a holiday where all the pilgrims felt so comfortable to come and be guests in Jerusalem, because we hear that the residents of Jerusalem, now that they had these Sukkot outside, would give free hospitality to all the pilgrims. Speaking of hospitality, the word in Aramaic for guest is ushpiz. Just like we have in English the word host and hospital, in Hebrew le'ashpez means to hospitalize, and ushpizin means guest. And in Jewish tradition, if you properly build your sukkah respect the festival, you will have special guests. This is not biblical, it's a late tradition, but it's well known, and when you walk around the different sukkot of the holiday, you will see the decorations are many times Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, Joseph, David. Why these people? Because it is a tradition that if you properly observe a holiday, you will have these special guests come and stay in the sukkah with you and bless your sukkah. So that is the concept called Ushpizin, which is also a wonderful movie of Shuli Rand. If you haven't watched it, it's a great look into the neighborhood Nachlaot in Jerusalem and into Hasidism, which is a Jewish movement that we will learn about later on. But Sukkot is not only a holiday which is a huge Jewish celebration. It is also, out of the 3 pilgrim festivals, the only one which is also to all the people of the world, at least in the days to come, and not only, as we will tell. Sukkot is considered the holiday of nations. 70 sacrifices are brought on the holiday, and 70 is the number representing the nations of the world. The prophet Zechariah, in a chapter that you will definitely be acquainted with, because it's the same chapter talking about the Mountain of Olives, which is a very important site for all 3 religions. And there he says, in chapter 14, the prophet Zechariah, all the nations shall go up from year to year to worship the King God of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, or in Hebrew, Chag HaSukkot. So Zechariah prophesied that in the days to come, when everybody recognizes the true God, there will be one festival that they all come to Jerusalem to learn, to be inspired, and then to go back home. And the holiday is Sukkot, not Passover, not Shavuot. These are particular Jewish holidays, but this one is supposed to be a holiday for all the nations, and this makes also good sense, because if we talk about the issue of closing a cycle and opening a new one, hoping for water and life for your family, for your household, these are things that are universal. They're not only Israeli. And therefore, it is a holiday that is a very inviting holiday, not only to Jews, but to everyone. And you will find many Christian groups that choose to come to Jerusalem on this holiday specifically, to take part in the celebrations, and of course to have a tour of the holy sites to Christianity on the holiday of Sukkot. The holiday ends. What is the last day of the holiday? Remember? Hosha'ana Rabbah. But after the holiday ends, the holiday is 7 days, like Passover. The 7th day of Sukkot is also Chol HaMoed. You're allowed to do any work or melacha you want to. The next day, the 8th day, is called in the Torah Shmini Atzeret. It's not part of a holiday. You're not allowed to sit on a sukkah. You need to go back to your home, but it is also a festival, a holiday, which was significant in the times of a tabernacle and temple. A special sacrifice was brought, a day of rest, a day with no melacha, Yom Tov. That, of course, is not so relevant without a temple, the part of the sacrifices at least. And there's a new meaning that was given in the times of the Talmud to the holiday, Simchat Torah. You're right. It's a bit confusing because we had Matan Torah, which is a name we gave to Shavuot, and now Simchat Torah, a very similar name, but a different celebration, different kind of celebration, and different reason. What we celebrated in Shavuot was receiving the Torah in Mount Sinai. What we celebrate on Simchat Torah, Shmini Atzeret, the day after Sukkot, is what we do with the Torah as a community. As we mentioned before, this month represents biblically an end of a process and a beginning. And in Talmudic times, when they made the Torah readings for every week, they made this month, and specifically this day, the day where you finish as a congregation to read the whole Torah from Genesis to Deuteronomy, and begin all over again with the book of Genesis. So on Simchat Torah, we read the end of Deuteronomy and the beginning of Genesis. And since, as a community, we finished a whole cycle of reading together the Torah, it's a huge celebration. And just like in Hosha'ana Rabbah, we surrounded the center of the synagogue with the 4 species and the Torah scrolls. Now the 4 species are out because it's not Sukkot anymore, but in the evening of Simchat Torah and in the morning, huge celebrations surrounding the synagogue with the Torah scrolls, dancing, singing. It's a huge celebration and very worthwhile to see if you haven't, and to bring your tourists if they have and if they haven't. And since it's such a big celebration, it's a little shame, but you can't really, if you're an Orthodox Jew, have music and loudspeakers and have many congregations come together, and therefore a custom developed in Israel of Hakafot Shniyot, which means after the ritual celebrations that are part of the holiday in the evening and the morning, at the end of the holiday at night, you can have loudspeakers and huge stages and musicians come, and thousands of people come together and celebrate again the joy of finishing as a community the Torah reading at the end of Deuteronomy and beginning again in Genesis. So that is the meaning of Simchat Torah. And that brings us also to the end of our topic of the 3 pilgrim holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Please make sure, just like we said earlier, that for every holiday, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, you can share what is the memory that the holiday carries. What are the special customs of the holiday, special text? And what is the agricultural meaning in this land of this holiday? So if you can give these 60 seconds for each of these holidays, then we can continue with the books of the Torah and with the migration of the people of Israel in the desert. Okay, so take a minute or 2 or 3, right? 60 seconds for every holiday, and we'll be back. We learned that the people of Israel sat in Sukkot in the desert. 40 years of migration in the desert. Thus said the Lord, I accounted to you favor the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness, in a land not sown. Jeremiah, כה אמר השם, זכרתי לך חסד נעורייך, אהבת כלולותייך, לכתך אחריי במדבר, ארץ לא זרועה. Again, it doesn't matter what your perspective is. A secular perspective of an author introducing a story and choosing the desert as a background, or saying the author is divine and chose to create the nation in this specific environment of the desert. What is it in the desert that is so special? Why were the people of Israel created as a nation, brought together in the desert, the Torah given in the desert? These are questions that are worth asking with a group. As you take them in the environment that is often foreign to people who come from Scotland, people who never saw a desert in Canada and in many parts of the United States too. And taking a hike, short or long, in the desert is an opportunity to ask, what is the secret of this place? What is so special about it? Why here was the nation of Israel created as a nation? Why here did monotheism come to the world? So what I would do is perhaps allow the group to kind of separate, sit on their own, one here, one there, maybe to walk a bit and leave a person at each spot. Give him 10 minutes of quiet in front of a view, and then collect them and ask these questions. What did you feel? Is there a reason why the nation will be created here? Why monotheism will come out from here and not from the middle of the forest? I think the questions are more important than answers. A way to kind of meditate for a second on these ideas. Two answers that I will suggest. One, you cannot survive by yourself in the desert. But if you cooperate as a group, supporting each other, you can. You can see all the Nabatean cities as a wonderful example, cooperating, collecting the water, finding the solutions, remembering that it's all for one and one for all. That's a good environment to create a group, to create a nation. About monotheism, there's something about this view. When you're not surrounded by many, many details, but you can see one big picture and maybe get a grasp of oneness, that all is one in this land that is still so similar to Genesis, so little changes in it. And perhaps the desert can speak to you and give you the bigger picture. In Hebrew, the word midbar and the word medaber, speak, and make people speak words that are a little different. It's the same word in Hebrew, midbar, medaber, and many of the revelations we'll have are revelations in the desert, people of the desert, shepherds, like Moses, like Abraham, like David, and worthwhile to try and give a taste of that experience also to our tourists. Speaking of a desert, let's come back to the people of Israel migrating in the desert. Where were we? 5 books of Moses. We spoke about the book of Genesis and what it talks about. We spoke of the universal stories and the family of the patriarchs and matriarchs. Then we came through the book of Exodus, told the stories of the Exodus of Egypt and receiving the Torah in Mount Sinai. In Mount Sinai will also come all the details of the tabernacle. For example, if you want to talk about the menorah, the vessels of the tabernacle, you go back to Mount Sinai. I can read now from the commandments of God in Mount Sinai described in Exodus chapter 25. You shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be made of hammered work, its base and its shaft, its cups. All the little detail of a tabernacle is brought here in Mount Sinai, and the book of Exodus finishes when the creation of a tabernacle by the people of Israel, led by Betzalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, the craftsman, the artist, leading all the work, all the melacha of a tabernacle. When it's completed, it's the end of the book of Exodus. So again, the book of Exodus begins with the slavery, continues with Exodus. The book of Exodus begins with the slavery in Egypt, through the Exodus, and it's completed with the completion of the work on the tabernacle. When the tabernacle is ready, it's the end of the book of Exodus. And then comes the book of Leviticus. What is the ritual of the tabernacle? And not only the tabernacle. Leviticus, named after the Levites, serving in the tabernacle, and it is a book of ritual. Ritual in the tabernacle and later on in the temple, and the ritual of the Jewish nation. From the book of Leviticus, we continue to the book called, in Hebrew, Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, in the desert. Actually, the book of Numbers could have been shorter if the story would unfold a little differently. But in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, 2 years into the migration of Israel in the desert, appears a very famous, very important story for us. The story of the first tourist. The first time that the word tour appears in the Bible. Of course, it's in Hebrew. When Moses sent them to scout the land, that's the translation, and in Hebrew, Latur et haaretz. When Moses sent them to scout the land of Canaan, Moses sends 12 spies, 12 presidents of the tribes. And he said to them, go up there into the Negev and on into the hill country and see what kind of country is it. Are the people who dwell in it strong or weak? Few or many? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Are the towns they live in open or fortified? Now, you can answer that. You saw the towns from the late Bronze Age. Are they fortified or are they just camped out? Very fortified. Are the people strong or weak? Very strong. You saw it in your own eyes as you toured Israel of the late Bronze, which is this period. Is it wooded or not? No, it depends where you go, right? And indeed, they went into the Negev and came to Hebron. And there they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. It had to be borne on a carrying frame by 2 of them. So are these grapes good? They're great, they're awesome. It's a good land, blessed with amazing fruit, as the book of Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 8 tells us. And some pomegranates and figs. At the end of 40 days, they returned from touring. That's the proper translation because the word in Hebrew is to the land. This is also, of course, the symbol of a ministry of tourism. The symbol of a ministry of tourism will remember the 2 good spies that, according to the tradition, they are the ones that came to show the great grapes of the land coming from the area of Hebron, Caleb and Joshua, though the 10 other tribes sent a different message. The presidents of the tribes told their people, yes, it's a great land. The fruit is wonderful, but the people are too strong. The cities are too fortified. Ephes ki az ha'am. No way can we prevail. They say to the people, maybe it would be better to stay in Egypt because there's no way we will enter the promised land. And the people are furious at Moses. They almost kill him. And for that, they will be punished. They will be found not worthy of coming into the land because they didn't have the faith they can actually make it into the promised land. When you go to the city of David in Jerusalem or to Hebron and see the walls from the Bronze Age, the walls of the Canaanite fortifications, you will understand the verse, V'nehi kechagavim be'enehem. We were like grasshoppers in their eyes. Just think what it is to stand under this huge fortification and think you need to have victory over that, and you're just a group of slaves that came out of Egypt. They came out of Egypt, but they were not able to take the slavery out of themselves. and to understand that they can be masters of their own faith and come to the promised land. There's a lot to be learned from that, about faith in ourselves and what it takes in order to come to your own promised land. But that generation was sentenced to die in the desert, and only their children, who will be born free children, raised in the desert and not in Egypt, will be coming into Israel, with two exceptions. Joshua and Caleb are the only two people from this generation that will eventually come into Israel. So the book of Numbers continues with the migration of the people of Israel in the desert for 40 years until they're ready to come into the promised land. We mentioned Caleb and Joshua are the two people who will come in. And who did we not mention? Of course, Moses. Moses will be denied the privilege, although he begged to God to come into the promised land. What he dedicated his whole life for was to bring these children of Israel into the promised land. He led them, and now he needs to let go and let Joshua, his successor, to bring them in and stay behind. It was very difficult to Moses. And before letting go, before sending them to their own fate and passing away to the next world, Moses really had to say a few things to these children that he educated, that he led, to remind them where they came from, what had happened in the previous generation, and what is going to happen, what they need to be careful of. And he gives a series of speeches before the entrance to the land. He says things. In Hebrew it works better. Moshe Omer Dvarim. The words of Moses are in the book of Dvarim. In English, the book of Deuteronomy. The last speech of Moses before they enter the land. Kind of a summary of all that was, and blessings that will come if they will follow the words of the Torah, and the curses that will come if not. And the book of Deuteronomy ends in Mount Nebo, and it says how he looked at the entire land from the mountain that you see. When you come down from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea, you see Mount Nebo, and you can talk about this chapter and others in the book of Deuteronomy. And after he sees the promised land that he will never come into, God buries him, and so the verse tells us, he buried him in the valley of the land of Moab. And no one knows his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were undimmed, and his vigor unabated. Now Joshua, son of Nun, who Moses appointed in the commandment of God to be the one to lead the people of Israel, will bring them into the next step, and will bring us in to the next step, as we just completed a really brief overview, kind of a big picture of the Torah, of the 5 books of Moses, and kind of the core of a Jewish story that we remember on a daily basis, and of course on the 3 pilgrim festivals. And now we're ready to come into the promised land together. But of course, after we take a little break.